A 9th century grave was dug up in Derbyshire, England. The warrior inside had a sword, battle wounds, and full Norse burial rites. But the DNA pulled from those bones traced back to origins that had nothing to do with Scandinavia. And that single skeleton just collapsed everything we thought we knew about who the Vikings actually were. Here is the thing that mainstream history keeps getting wrong. When most people hear the word Viking, they picture a blonde Scandinavian warrior with a horned helmet sailing out of Norway. But genetic sequencing reveals something far more explosive than that. Vikings were not a race. They were not even really a nationality. They were something closer to a mindset, a military culture, a network that stretched across continents in ways that modern science is only now beginning to prove. And here is where it gets personal. You might be part of that network. Even if your ancestry has zero connection to Scandinavia, even if your family comes from Ireland, Scotland, Russia, Turkey, or North Africa, the evidence is there. We just have to know where to look. Let us start with what the DNA is actually telling us. Genetic ancestry research uses something called haplogroups. Think of these as your ancestry fingerprint. Every human on the planet carries specific genetic markers inherited from thousands of years of migration and mixing. Scientists can now trace these markers like a forensic investigator following footprints across time. The haplogroup most associated with Viking ancestry is called R1a. When researchers began mapping R1a across modern populations, the results did not match the official story at all. Yes, R1a shows up strongly in Scandinavia, but it also dominates large populations across Poland, Ukraine, Russia, and even parts of India and Pakistan. The same genetic signature, the same ancestral marker, the same DNA fingerprint, spread across thousands of miles and dozens of modern nations. So either Vikings traveled much further than your history textbook admits, or the people carrying that marker are all connected to the same ancient warrior culture that eventually became the Norse world. Either way, the map of Viking DNA is enormous, and it is pointing at populations that have never once thought of themselves as Viking descendants. But wait, because there is another haplogroup that blows this open even wider. R1b is the most common Y chromosome haplogroup in Western Europe. It dominates in Ireland, Scotland, France, Spain, and Portugal. And here is where the forensic trail gets interesting. Ancient DNA extracted from Viking Age burial sites in Britain shows clear R1b signatures mixed in with Scandinavian markers. These were not local people who got conquered. These were people with mixed ancestry, warriors and settlers who carried both Atlantic European and Norse DNA in the same body. Genetic sequencing from a 2020 landmark study published in the journal Nature analyzed over 400 Viking Age individuals from burial sites across Europe, Greenland, and even North America. The findings shook the academic world. Roughly 10% of people buried in Scandinavian Viking graves were not genetically Scandinavian at all. They had ancestry from the British Isles, from Southern Europe, from Asia, and they were buried with full Viking honors, weapons, ships, grave goods, the whole ritual. That tells you something massive. Being Viking was not about where you were born. It was about who you fought with, what you believed, and how you lived. Think of it like special forces. The Navy SEALs do not recruit based on birthplace. They recruit based on what you can do and who you are willing to become. The Norse world operated on the same principle. Now let us talk about Viking migration, because this is where most history classes completely abandon the facts. Everyone knows about the raids on England and Ireland beginning around 793 AD with the attack on Lindisfarne. But that is just the opening move in a global story. The Norse did not just raid coastal monasteries. They built trade routes that connected the Arctic to the Middle East. They settled in Iceland and Greenland. They reached North America 500 years before Columbus. And they moved through what is now Russia and Ukraine, founding cities, establishing dynasties, and leaving DNA that is still detectable in those populations today. The Norse warriors who traveled east were called the Varangians. They paddled rivers through Eastern Europe, traded in Constantinople, and served as elite bodyguards for the Byzantine emperor. That unit was called the Varangian Guard, and it was the most prestigious military force in the medieval world. If you have Eastern European or Russian ancestry, ancestral markers confirm that the Varangian genetic trail runs directly through your family tree's backyard. But something even more surprising is hiding in the genetics of the British Isles. After the Viking Age raids came settlement. The Danelaw, a region of England that was literally governed under Norse law, covered huge portions of what is now Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and East Anglia. Millions of modern English people are direct descendants of those Norse settlers. Studies suggest that up to 6% of modern British men carry direct Norse paternal lineage. That is around 2 million living people in Britain alone who carry Viking DNA and may not know it. Here is a myth that needs to be killed permanently. Vikings did not wear horned helmets. That image was invented by a 19th century costume designer for a theatrical production, and it stuck. The only fully intact Viking Age helmet ever found, discovered in Norway in 1943, has no horns, 0. The real helmets were iron, rounded, sometimes with a simple nose guard, functional, not theatrical, because these were not performers, they were operators. And those longships, every time someone calls them primitive wooden boats, a genetic historian somewhere quietly loses faith in humanity. Longships were the stealth technology of the medieval world. They were engineered to be shallow enough to sail up rivers and light enough to be physically carried over land between waterways. They were fast enough to outrun almost anything else on the ocean. The Norse were not stumbling across coastlines by accident. They were running precision operations with equipment specifically designed for speed, surprise, and extraction. Now here is the piece that almost nobody talks about. Genetic sequencing of Viking Age populations reveals a surprising level of diversity that directly challenges the blonde, blue-eyed stereotype. Analysis of ancient DNA from burial sites in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway shows that dark hair and dark eyes were not uncommon among people who were culturally and genetically Norse. The popular image of the Viking is not just inaccurate, it is a modern invention designed to fit a particular cultural narrative. One burial in particular stopped researchers cold. A grave in Birka, Sweden, discovered in the 1800s and long assumed to belong to a male Viking warrior based on the weapons, armor, and chess-like strategy game pieces found inside, was subjected to modern DNA analysis in 2017. The skeletal remains were genetically female. Ancestral markers confirm this individual was a woman, buried with every marker of a high-ranking military commander. Not a wife, not a servant, a commander. The mainstream story said women did not fight. The DNA said something very different. So where does this leave you? If you have Irish, Scottish, English, Eastern European, Russian, or even parts of South Asian ancestry, there is a genuine, scientifically supported possibility that Viking genetic markers are threaded through your own DNA. You may not see it in a basic ancestry percentage breakdown. These haplogroups often get categorized under regional labels rather than being flagged as Norse directly. But the forensic trail is there for anyone willing to follow it. Here is the bigger picture that genetic sequencing is forcing historians to accept. The Viking Age was not a regional event, it was a global one. The Norse world touched 4 continents. It connected populations that had no other point of contact. It left genetic fingerprints from the coast of Newfoundland to the streets of Istanbul. And the modern descendants of that world are sitting in living rooms in Dublin and Delhi and Detroit, carrying that DNA without any idea. The evidence does not match the official story, because the official story was always too small. Real history does not fit neatly into a textbook chapter. It bleeds across borders, mixes cultures, and survives in ways that only science can trace now. You might be Viking, not as a fantasy, not as a costume, but as a biological, genetic, ancestral reality. And that is not mythology. That is exactly what the DNA is telling us.